So I found this document on the internet a little bit ago, and I saved it for fun, but didn't get around to reading it until about a week ago or so. And I was actually fairly surprised by what they put in this supposedly declassified KGB document. Now this thing is called Project Orion, and it's supposedly supposed to be this declassified KGB document that contains all this historical information, and it talks about everything. It talks about how governments have gone out of their way to try and destroy certain aspects of history. And we know that for a fact, right? We know for a fact that, for example, the Tartarian civilization has been absolutely wiped off the map. Russia absolutely went out of its way to erase their entire existence. It's the same thing with the Welsh over there in Britain or whatever, right? Back in the day, like 100 plus years ago, or even before that, suddenly the people in charge over there started trying to get rid of anybody that was Welsh, and that includes the language, any kind of Welsh history, etc. Anyway, we have these organizations that do this kind of stuff, and we don't, sometimes it's kind of hard to prove, well, maybe not, I don't know. There's still enough evidence right nowadays to prove that governments are out there trying to erase history. We all know that. That's not new. That's not exciting. But this particular KGB document, it kind of focuses on the world, but it does discuss things like getting rid of and erasing any history up there about Tartaria. Like it admits that in here, and I believe it even talks about why a little bit. But that is not why I wanted to discuss this document. Just wanted to frame it up a little bit so you guys understand where this document is coming from and the kind of stuff it talks about. Right? It calls out, well, maybe calls out is not the correct term, but it points out, the absolute purposeful deletion of history. Now, I don't want to cover any of that. I just wanted to say that was interesting that it's in there. We'll actually probably look over that later, because that's a whole other deep thing in and of itself. But what this document really does do that is extremely fascinating is that not only does it go back in time in history, and it just kind of tries to explain stuff, like it talks about some of like what Nazi Germany was doing with their occult stuff. It goes into some of that, and how actually important and very real that occult research was. So it does talk a little bit about that. But the real weird thing, or the interesting thing that this document goes into for some weird reason, is that it starts to cover history like millions of years ago. It actually goes out of its way to give dates about how the history of the planet Earth, started what you're dealing with Enki and Enlil, and you have catastrophes, and you have all this stuff happening over a course of millions of years, and this document actually calls out all of these dates. Now, this is the problem. Now, the very first thing when we start seeing documents talking about millions and billions of years old stuff, and they're trying to point out that, yes, we know exactly what happened 450,000 years ago. Enlil and Enki did this. They have no idea. So this is where the problems with documents like this come into play. All right, and actually, there's other problems as well. Let's cover the actual main real problems first, right? So I realize that this document is probably not true. Or at least it's not 100% fact. Okay, I get that. And I'm not looking at this, by the way, as if this thing is actually giving us 100% reliable information. We all know what governments and government agencies are out there to do, right? They're out there to put out disinformation. They're out there to ensure that certain viewpoints are followed and other viewpoints are deleted, right? And this document goes into some of the deletion of Russian history, right? The getting rid of Tartaria, for example, is the main thing for them. I am not a huge Tartarian researcher or anything, so I don't know exactly. Well, maybe I have an idea of why they don't like the Tartarian concept, but it's just weird that anybody would go out of their way to just erase a huge chunk of history, because by all accounts, the Tartarians were huge. I mean, these guys are really important. These guys were a huge literal empire, and it sounds like aspects of Tartaria, would have spawned stuff like Genghis Khan, etc. They would have flowed out from the north, or they did flow out from the north. And they spread their influence all over hell and back over there in Asia and Europe and in North Africa, right? Anyway, Why you'd want to delete that? Well, there are a very particular group of people that absolutely would want to delete that. And it makes me wonder if that particular group of people finally got their hands into the Russian government, into the KGB, etc., to try to do things like delete Tartaria. Anyway, so when we find documents like this, we have to be really skeptical and we have to be really careful, because we know for a fact that there is a ton of disinformation out there. For example, the Tartaria thing is interesting, not just because Tartaria appears to have been, by all historical accounts, a very real, huge empire over there in the Siberian Russian type of area. Well, the reality is, if you read all the records, Tartaria spread itself, or was considered, even over in Europe and Japan, etc. That's neither here nor there for this discussion, but it's interesting to find something like Tartaria in the historical records that is never talked about anywhere, right? So when we see something like this start to pop up in a KGB document that is, declassified, we have to tread carefully, because we have to wonder, is the KGB or is the Russian government really going to declassify a document that incriminates people in the deletion of certain historical facts? Probably not. I doubt it. But I don't know. Who knows? It's possible that the document was real and, hey, it's declassified, whatever. People forgot that it was in this particular situation. And the guy who was sitting there, doing the declassifying, he's new on the job. He doesn't know. He just reads this. So this document reads insane, by the way. So, if the guy who's going through and is in charge of releasing and declassifying documentation, he starts reading this and he sees things like Enki and Enlil, creating the human race and a million years of this and that. It sounds crazy because this document quite literally does contain that kind of alternative research, which is fascinating. Like, why would a KGB document that does talk about things, real things that we know exist, like, the Nazi occult studies and all of that kind of stuff, and it takes it very seriously, but then they go on to start talking about, Enki, Enlil, pole shifts, and multiple catastrophes that hit this planet. Now that's what I want to focus on is the catastrophism part. There's actually other stuff we'll do in a different show, but what I find very interesting about this document is that not only does this document go through and start trying to catalog, all the Sumerian stuff, and they even talk about Atlantis, and they go through and they talk about multiple floods that shaped the earth, etc., but it actually starts to talk about the catastrophism from a plasma physics point of view. Now this is where I started taking this document a little more seriously. On page 29 or 21, whichever, I don't know why there's two different page numbers on here. It's page 34 in Acrobat, like that. So you take your pick, 21, 29, or 34, it's all the same page. There is a section called Global Disasters. Now, this document had actually covered various global disasters reaching to this point, to this section, but it just talks about those disasters in the sense of how it just affected Earth. It does not talk about the disasters on how they actually happened until this point. And this is where things get extremely interesting from a scientific point of view. The reason why this gets interesting is because of, like I said, they start talking about electrodynamics and they start talking about basically plasma physics. They don't like specifically say plasma physics, but they talk about electromagnetic dysfunctions, for example. Like, electromagnetism. The very second we start to hear about electromagnetism, now we are in the electric universe, plasma physics realm. And as we now know scientifically, that is the actual correct realm of where things are run by. We don't need dark matter. We don't need dark energy. We don't need the space-time fabric or whatever the hell it is people believe nowadays. You don't need any of that. All you need is plasma physics. Electricity is all you need to explain everything we see. So I found it interesting that this KGB document decides to actually make a very poignant point about pointing out the electromagnetic properties of the disasters that hit Earth. Now, the reason why this is important is because you're not going to hear this anywhere else, really. Normally, electricity is completely ignored, even on the alternative researcher side of things. I mean, those guys don't want to bring up plasma physics either. Either A, because they don't even know about it, right? Nobody is exposed to this stuff unless you stumble into it, right? Or you're lucky enough to have a friend point it out to you. But the reality is there is no ad campaign for plasma physics like there is for relativity, right? Relativity is slammed into your face everywhere you go. You have to believe in relativity. You have to believe in space-time. You have to believe in dark energy and dark matter. But no, you don't get the proof for it, of course, right? It's crazy. The mainstream is insane the way they push that. But they've been doing that for so long now that nobody even contemplates another possibility, right? It's if you move outside of relativity and you're in the academic world, you immediately are ostracized. You immediately lose funding. You're probably not going to get good grades. You're going to lose your job, etc. Because relativity is correct, right? Everybody knows that Einstein is right? And at this, it's so frustrating. Anyway. The fact that this document doesn't try to explain things in the sense of relativism. It explains things using electromagnetic dynamics. And this is what I found crazy, because this KGB document is actually hitting directly on the real science on how you get mega disasters to happen on Earth. All right, so in catastrophism, some of the main stuff that creates the catastrophes are other planets, right? We have other charged bodies interacting with Earth only in the past few thousand years that allow these insane kind of disasters to happen. Whenever we read about ancient history and stuff like that, and you hear our ancestors talk about, a mountain of water rolling across the land, or fire and brimstone and oil raining from the sky, all of this stuff sounds crazy at first, because you're like, how the hell do you generate anything like that? And if you are stuck in a relativity mindset, nothing will ever make sense to you. I mean, I guess, even though technically you could still get those events to happen, even using relativity, they're so far out in left field, though, to make them happen, to where the concept becomes ridiculous. But if you switch over to plasma physics and electric universe concepts, suddenly all of this stuff becomes very easy and very real. Right? The science, it's there for electromagnetism. It's not there for relativity. Okay, I know. I'm ranting, but God, it's annoying. It's just all right. So anyway, this document. Let me read some of this. I want to go through this because A, it's interesting, but B, there's another part that's not necessarily related to catastrophism that I wanted to cover because it's important to understand something when you read these kind of documents. In fact, before we read the disaster part, let me talk about what I'm talking about. Let me explain what I mean. So we have to remember that when we look at documents like this, there's a really good chance that the people who released this are not our friends. And people who are not our friends are not probably going to hook us up with the complete and utter truth. For all of you who are skeptical about this document, I am right there with you. It's very important to understand that the things we're about to read from this document, just listen to, these are just something to think about and take in, because the perspective, especially from the time frame, right, in the 80s, this came out in the 80s. This was, I don't know if it was declassified in the 80s, but it was made in the 80s. The fact that even in the 80s, they're already talking about electromagnetism is highly interesting. Even if a lot of the stuff in this document is fake, right? The fact that they are willing to admit that electromagnetism matters, and it matters on not just a planetary scale or even a solar system scale, they literally talk about it at the universal scale. And that's exactly what electric universe or plasma physics deals with. I mean, it encompasses all of that. So what I wonder is, were people actually on the right track back in the day, and then relativity got such a hard push that even people in the KGB were starting to buy that garbage, and it, this didn't matter to them, right? They figured, yeah, throw in the electromagnetic stuff because it's not real anyway. Screw them, right? This is crazy science. Did they know what they were doing? I have no idea, which brings me to the point of the document itself and how we have to treat it. We have to be skeptical, and we have to understand that the stuff, unfortunately, that is contained in here, it might be designed in such a way as to hamper any kind of real information that we could get out of it. So we have to be careful. But that doesn't mean we can't get information out of it. Right, we can play the same game that the alphabet agencies play, right? If they want to mix, one of the best ways to lie, and to lie to somebody, is for that lie to contain as much truth as possible. It's entirely possible that there's a lot of stuff in here that is true, but then it's just drenched with other kind of BS garbage, right? Which makes both invalidate each other, right? That's also another age-old psychological conditioning trick, right? If somebody starts talking about the truth and you want to shut them down, what you do is you say something to the tune of, that guy is crazy because he believes in aliens, which are scientifically possible, and flat earth, which is on the ridiculous side of things. So what happens is that somebody who believes in a real scientific principle, aliens for example, if you're equated with some sort of a crazy conspiracy theory that is legitimately crazy, right, and it's pushed pretty hard as being crazy, then suddenly the average person will then ignore whatever that person is then going to say. Right, so this document could also be pulling that to one level or another. I don't know. I have no idea. Anyway, but since they are talking about catastrophism, that in and of itself is very, very interesting. I think the fact that that there is a document at all that even wastes its time trying to map out, the whole Enki Enlil timeline, the Sumerians. It even goes into Atlantis. Maybe we'll have to go into that as well. We'll do that in a different show. But it goes into all of the supposedly crazy conspiratorial stuff, right? And it gives it a date, and it gives it some names, and it gives it a flow and a story of what happened. This document goes to town. It's funny that it does all of that. Anyway, so it's like 200 pages. It's like why would these guys literally wrote a 200 plus page document on stuff that probably didn't even need to be wasted their time with? Like, why would you waste your time writing this? It's the people who believe in the Enki and Enlil stuff, or who are trying to research it and try to figure that stuff out. They're not a threat to anybody, right? Those people have already been lumped into the insane category generally. Now, I'm not calling you insane if you're researching that stuff. I'm right there with you. It's there. We have to figure it out. And I don't have an answer, but the reality is there's probably no reason to go out of your way to create this whole declassified document just to point out just to try to make people who are studying Sumerians and believing in the Enki Enlil situation crazy, because they're already considered crazy by the mainstream, right? So why waste your time going further? I don't know. Like, it's an interesting question because it's almost unnecessary. Like, why even waste your time? It seems like you could have had somebody who wrote this do something more productive other than coming down on people who believe in, catastrophism or something like that. I don't know. Unless, I guess this is a good point, unless those people, all of those researchers who are studying the ancient past and are trying to figure out catastrophism and are trying to figure out our planet's real past, I guess if you feel that the people who are doing that kind of research, like we are right now, maybe those people, us, perhaps were actually a real threat. Yeah, what about that? What if the reason why they had to make something like this was because real progress is actually being made in starting to understand our planet's true history? Yeah, that's something to think about. Then you start releasing 200 plus page documents to try to make those people sound crazy. Yeah, I wonder if that's it. Maybe people are getting closer than we think. Right? I keep saying it, but perhaps the Enki Enlil researchers, for example, maybe they are onto something. Something to think about. I mean, that might be why you would create this document. You try to throw it off. The reason why I say that is because when you start to look through this document, like I said, they go through a huge timeline of ancient Earth back like 1,000,000+ years or so. And they put Enki and Enlil like 450,000 years ago. And they put Atlantis back during this time as well. So here's where I would have a problem, is the fact that this document is trying to shove events way far back into our past. You know, they're doing the old mainstream geology trick, saying, oh yeah, and the old mainstream evolutionist trick of saying, well, we can't really prove anything because it happened 8 billion years ago, so it's impossible for us to truly do any kind of science experimentation. So that means you must just believe us. Right, that's how they pull that off, right? So same thing with this document. If they take Enki and Enlil and throw them way back in the past, like this document does, hundreds of thousands of years, suddenly people, your average person will get disjointed from that, right? It's much easier to be connected to something that was like 10 years ago as opposed to 10,000 years ago. And when you start talking 400,000 plus years ago, how connected, or how much do you really start to care about that when you see those dates, right? Most people are done, right? If they hear a date like, oh, this happened 400 bajillion years ago, everybody's eyes, or not everybody, but I should say the vast majority of people's eyes will glaze over and they'll move on with life. Because if this happened so long ago, you're just absolutely disconnected from it. It may as well have never happened, right? That's the problem. When you start working with large numbers like that, like the mainstream pushes out there on us, the general populace, right? That's the kind of psychological situation we start to get used to. Right? If we can't identify with something as a human, this is basic human nature. If you're unable to identify with something at any level, really, you'll move on, right? You might file it in the back of your head as something interesting to post on, X one day, because people do that for some weird reason. But that's it, right? That's where that will die, and that's where people will no longer start to pay attention, at least the majority. Now, the minority that keeps persevering, that looks at this and they're like, well, yeah, okay, fine, 450,000 years ago, but let's look at this and let's keep studying. Let's see what we find. Those people are dangerous because those people are now open to looking for the truth. Now, here's the next part of the psychological trick that agencies can do to you, or anybody who's trying to control you can then do to you. If you keep going, the next thing, of course, is to keep feeding these people inaccurate information. So if we have a declassified KGB document that says Enki was around 450,000 years ago, there is a certain portion of the alternative research group who will immediately take that as an admission of truth. Right? Why would the KGB or Russia release this document if it wasn't true? Why would they even record it? It must be true. And then that 450,000 years ago becomes their canon, right? That's where they'll stick to. So then you lose another chunk of researchers. And then now you're really only left with a small group of people who are just looking for the truth. But the people who are looking for the truth, they have to sift through all of the garbage that's out there. And it's not just the garbage being created by alphabet agencies. It's the garbage being created by general researchers not knowing that they're creating garbage, right? Somebody writes a paper, the mainstream, for example, and let's just, they write a paper on Sumerian, and it's generally wrong, right? Let's just for discussion's sake, say it's wrong. It's just garbage. But what happens is that mainstream will publish that paper, and very few people ever peer review nowadays, especially. But even if somebody does peer review, because the topic is so obscure, relatively speaking, to evidence to support the claim, people can get away with all kinds of crazy claims. Then what happens is down the line, other researchers will come, they'll find that paper, they will think that paper is legit because it was never rescinded, and they'll start to source that paper, hence creating a mountain of garbage that real researchers then have to sift through, right? And this is how you hide things. You hide stuff right in the open. So I wouldn't be surprised if this KGB document actually has nuggets of truth. So I know, 20 bajillion minutes later, But that's the reason why I actually wanted to pay attention to it a little bit, because when you start talking about real science, in this case electromagnetism, in your declassified document, suddenly things change a little bit, because we know for a fact that electromagnetism is extraordinarily important to all sciences, really. I mean, everything. If the universe is indeed 99.9% plasma, as all the evidence points towards, that means this document holds some sort of weight. Because if you're going to go to other sources are not going to talk about electromagnetism. They're stuck in relativity, right? That's what they're going to be doing forever. So you already know those people. They know that those people are already taken care of because they're already on the wrong track. So when we find a document like this talking about the real, legitimate, testable science that runs everything, that is generally trying to be hidden, right? No, plasma physics is not getting any kind of ad campaign, right? Plasma physics is not on the Learning Channel or Discovery or whatever the hell people watch nowadays, right? This is not being promoted in any way in the mainstream because it's got to stay down, because it's the truth, right? We can't have the truth coming out. So this document is talking about the truth straight up. That's why I give some sort of credence to this. Now, let me read this document. Let me read some of this part of the Catastrophism to see what they're talking about, and let's compare it with what we know nowadays and see if the stuff that is in this document is actually scientifically possible, and maybe this document actually has some real information that can help us fill in some gaps into all of our catastrophism stories and stuff like that. The other thing really quick that we need to talk about just have it out there, is that this document really does go with the millions and billions of year type of a chronology. Everything takes just forever to happen. In catastrophism or in real history, in real chronology, that is not what we find scientifically, right? Any of these dates that they say happened, 1 million years ago or 1 billion years ago, we have no proof that any of that is true. Never forget that. All of these years, there's no reason to believe any of that stuff. We have no legitimate way we have no legitimate method of dating anything accurately at that level. It's not even close. We don't have anything like that. I can't stress that enough. Okay. Let's read the stupid document. All right, so this is section 5 on page 29, 21, or 34. I literally 3 different pages here. All right, so this is what it says. The research of German scientists describes the natural characteristics of the events preceding the global cataclysms associated with the passage of the quote-unquote iron planet in the solar system. Really quick, so like I said, we're not starting at the beginning of this. This KGB document supposes, or it says, that apparently there is a planet made out of iron that is part of our solar system. It's kind of like the Nibiru, I don't know how you guys pronounce it. Nibiru, however the Nibiru, I don't know. All right, anyway, it's that kind of a situation, and the document blames a lot of the cataclysms that happened to Earth on this supposed iron planet. Now, the reason why it's an iron planet is because, like I said, this document talks about electromagnetism. What this document doesn't seem to understand is it doesn't seem to understand anything about Birkeland currents. Now, which is weird because Birkeland currents had already been discovered long before this document was created. So it's interesting that they do not directly talk about a Birkeland current, but they do go on to talk about rotation being important. The reason why they call it an iron planet, though, is because, iron has magnetic properties, and they try to blame. It's like they're wow, this is interesting. It's like they're kind of like half telling us the truth, because we know in catastrophism, or just in our real past, we know that Earth had several different close calls with multiple planets in our solar system only in the past few thousand years. So technically speaking, this document is actually half right, because it is blaming the catastrophes that it covers on a planetary body. And in fact, that's exactly what our ancestors describe, isn't it? Like, I've covered this countless times on this channel, and it will be forever covered on this channel, right? But instead of like one random iron planet that's just flying around in a random orbit, right? We know now the actual names of the planets and the positions of the planets as they orbited close by to Earth, while all of the planetary orbits were trying to stabilize during this period of time. So it's interesting that this document would be willing to give credit to a planetary body for all of the cataclysms, and they integrate electromagnetism. Those two main points, the planet part and the electromagnetism part, those are two legitimate, scientifically provable things that did affect Earth, and that we have the evidence for, not only historically, but archaeologically, geologically, etc. So this document is crazy. Like, it's like it gets things wrong as far as we can tell, and it's probably getting them wrong on purpose. That's what I would like to know. I would love to know, like, this iron planet thing, right? So they're using the iron planet excuse in place of Mars at one point, and of course Venus at one point. Earth has several close encounters with planets, not this one iron planet. But what they're not telling us is that they are not going forward, and they are not admitting to what our ancestors talked about, right? They are not talking about Venus. They are not talking about Jupiter, Saturn, Mars, etc. They blame it on one planet. So I would say that's a pretty good piece of disinformation. So here's why is this disinformation? Your average person who reads this, the iron planet is going to click for some people, right? They're gonna be like, oh yeah, a giant iron planet, it'd be like kind of gravity and stuff, and it's so dense that, yeah, I could see that messing with Earth. Oh, that must be true, and the KGB pointed it out, right? It's a half truth, so we have to be careful. All right, okay, I know, I'm rambling. All right, let's go on. So, to understand these events, it is necessary to take into account the totality of global aspects of electromagnetic dysfunctions occurring deep in space, which directly affect the rotation of the Earth's core. Now that's the kicker. They're not talking about gravity. They're not saying anything like that. They immediately go to electromagnetism. And that is scientifically correct, but it is not mainstream correct to say that. This is why I give this document a little bit of weight. So there might actually be some good information buried in here. All right, anyway, let's keep going. So it gets crazier. The existing system of helical spiral-like mutual circulation of cosmic bodies and planets in the universe resembles a complex clockwork mechanism in which all the small and large gears connecting with each other play an important role in the dynamics of the mechanical process. Now, the main point we take out of that is the mutual circulation. Literally circulating, literally spinning around. They literally say a helical spiral-like circulation. And that is literally a Birkeland current. This is what is fascinating. They are talking about Birkeland currents without talking about Birkeland currents. It makes me wonder if they're hiding it or if they didn't even know about it. It's a good question. I don't have an answer for it. But the fact that they are identifying rotation, right? What's the most important part of all of this, right? Rotation, rotation, rotation. That is like the key to everything when it comes to electrodynamics and electromagnetics. That's the key. Rotation, rotation, rotation. And that's exactly what these people are talking about as well. So these guys, even back in the 80s, they were already onto the truth without maybe understanding that they're onto the truth. Anyway, that gives this some weight. Let's keep going. The sun and the earth simultaneously participate in a 3-level progressive movement. The Earth revolves around the Sun revolves around the center of the local group of stars, which in turn, as well as the solar system, spirals around the center of the star cluster of the Guida Belt, the local structure of the Orion Cygnus Gal arm, the quote-unquote Milky Way. The galaxy spins around the center of the Andromeda Nebula, which spins around the center of the Virgo supercluster, and so on indefinitely. See, rotation, rotation, rotation. That's the key, and they're right here admitting it. All dynamically rotating bodies emit electromagnetic vibrations of different frequencies, which the change of which leads to a violation of the rhythmic oscillation of objects on the principle from large to small. That is one hell of a sentence. And by the way, if it sounds weird, like there's words jumbled in there, this document is translated from Russian into English. So if this looks photoshopped, it's not because it was badly photoshopped, it's just the translation. And so the translation is obviously not going to be perfect for us English speakers. So if you hear something weird, it might be me being stupid, but it might be the document itself. Anyway, don't you love that? I mean, they are literally right here calling out the electromagnetic vibrations and how they affect everything in, not only on Earth, but in the universe in itself. And that is exactly what caused all of our cataclysms back in the day, right? Our solar system went through one hell of a car accident, right? We crashed, the Jupiter-Sun binary system crashed into the Saturn, whatever. I don't know what the other planet is in the Saturn one. Might have been Uranus. I don't know. Anyway, we have those two star systems, crash into each other. And what does that do, right? Well, that means everybody sees each other electrically. All those magnetic fields, they were fine, happy, they had found their equilibrium. All of a sudden, you have another charged body charging into a different solar system, and all hell breaks loose, right? And one of the main principles of electricity is that it always tries to find the path of least resistance, and it automatically self-sorts itself. And that's what we would have seen during these cataclysms. Now, in the process of all of these planetary bodies and brown dwarf bodies trying to, find that equilibrium, that's where all the gods in the sky are fighting. Right? That is where our ancestors got to see all these planets up really close to Earth. I'm talking they were probably the size of the moon, if not bigger back in the day. These people, our ancestors saw that stuff in the sky, right? And the reason why they saw all of that was because our solar system was trying to sort itself out. And in the process of sorting out all of the orbits, for all the new planets and all the new bodies that were now in this new system, right, we ran into some trouble. And it's not just us that ran into trouble. All the planets got screwed up. Not only the planets, but, the brown dwarfs, the gas giants, quote unquote, the sun, everybody got messed up. And the reason why we all got messed up was because all of the rhythmic oscillation, as this document states, it was violated. It was messed with. And so that's why we get the craziness. All of that craziness, all of that catastrophe, or all of the catastrophes that went down, that was the simple process of electromagnetism taking place, trying to find the new equilibrium in that system. All right, so moving on. A change in the pulsation rhythm of the Earth's inner core cannot cause electromagnetic dysfunctions in the life of the sun and the structure of larger stars. Now, the Earth's inner core, okay, really quick, I'm not sure exactly what they're trying to make a statement here on. The reason why is because we still do not technically know what the Earth's layers are, right? I know you're probably thinking right now, yes, we do. We figured all that out. Those posters they have where you have, the mantle and the magma and the core and the inner crust and blah, blah, blah. You have all of this stuff. That's all just made up. That's all theory. There's none of that has been proven in any sense of the word, right? You have no clue what's going on 11 miles beneath your feet. Like, we just don't know. We have no idea what's going on just right there below your feet. Geologists, unfortunately, play a really good trick on people, making it sound like they have an idea, but the reality is we have no clue what's going on. So when these guys start talking about the core of the Earth, and there are other parts in this where they do discuss that, they're assuming that the Earth's core is some sort of an iron situation, and I don't, and that's fine. Maybe that's part of the disinfo. Maybe they're just buying into the garbage. I have no idea, but it's stuff like that we still have to be careful of, because the reality is we do not know what the Earth's core is made out of. But what's interesting is that they do talk about the rhythm of the Earth. Now, there is a rhythm of the Earth, isn't there? Right? The Schumann frequency. So at the very least, the document is admitting that vibration and electrical frequencies do matter, not just to Earth, but the solar system in general. Let's move on. Let's see what else it says here. All right, so the constant and rhythmic rotation of the Earth's inner core depends on global electromagnetic disturbances that occur both deep in space and in the structure of the solar system. Once again, they're dead on. What is affecting all of this, right? It is the electromagnetism created by Birkeland currents flowing through not only just our sun, but basically the entire solar system. Right? Everybody's got some sort of a Birkeland current fueling them, powering them, affecting them. Right? That's where we get all of this rotation from. Right? That's what solves all the rotational problems, by the way, that relativists and gravity people have no clue how to figure out. Right? This is why they had to create dark energy and dark matter, because they couldn't figure out how the hell planets were not just spinning out of their solar systems, because the inertia of the planets, or the velocity of the planets as they rotate around the sun, and as we rotate around the galaxy, the way that how fast everything rotates, it's not possible for us to stay locked in to our orbits under the standard theory of gravity. That's why they had to create dark matter, because you had to create something that was like a great attractor, because otherwise everybody would just fly apart. Like, this is a scientific fact. So it's interesting that this KGB document is not even wasting its time with gravity. It goes straight to electromagnetism. That's why this is important. Okay, keep going. The passage around the Earth, such object as the iron planet, more than the Earth 50 times. Damn, so they think it was 50 times the size of Earth, this quote-unquote iron planet. That's one hell of a density right there, right? So they're probably trying to figure out a way to get gravity to interact with the other planets, because maybe they're not willing to give electricity all the credit. I don't know, let's keep going. Which intrudes into the inner circle of the solar system once in 3,600 years, clockwise, perturbing the electromagnetic flows and turbulence in rotating planets and solar system objects. Unwinding counterclockwise, of course, leads to disruption of the electromagnetic oscillation of the Earth's core. Now, I can't latch on to anything about the electromagnetic oscillations of our core, because I don't know what's going on down there, and I don't know what evidence they're using to really prove that the core is the key to all of this, right? With the core will probably play. This is what's interesting. I gotta look this up. The core, the Earth's core, is the Earth's core even necessary if you have Birkeland currents technically fueling the electromagnetic field around Earth? Like, does that mean that whatever's at the center of the Earth could be anything? Does it have to be a liquid or a solid? Could it just be air? I don't know. I'm not saying that the Earth is hollow. I'm just asking questions, because the interesting thing, once you start to factor in Birkeland currents, electromagnetism, you don't have to have some sort of a spinning core inside of Earth, which makes no sense anyways, by the way. So for all you geologists that believe in a spinning core, it doesn't even make sense anyway, because you don't need it, right? The Birkeland current provides the current that would create your electromagnetic field. Yeah, I don't know. maybe that gives, oh, I guess it actually technically would give credence to a hollow Earth because of how, oh yeah, because of the anode-cathode situation, you might actually be able to have a hollow Earth. You might actually have to have a hollow Earth. Huh, alright, that's not what this paragraph's about. Alright, the main thing about this paragraph, though, which is very important, right? They keep talking about electromagnetic flows and turbulence, and that's exactly what we would see if we have objects messing with each other. But check out this timeline. 3,600 years ago. I find this fascinating that they are willing to admit that a planetary body would have passed by Earth not 600 million years ago, but just 3,600 years ago. And what's even more interesting is that date I would bet is based on modern mainstream chronology, no doubt. So if we use their date of 3,600 years ago, where does that put us? That literally puts us right at the Venus event that all of our ancestors talked about. These guys right here are accidentally, I think, they are confirming that the Venus event happened. Like that's actually pretty important, man. Wow. Like they're willing to say that here. Why? Why would they give that date? These guys came to the conclusion on their own, it looks like, that a planetary body messed with Earth just 3,600 years ago. They're blaming it on an iron planet. All of our ancestors blame it on Venus. Huh. Yeah. So there's some correlation there, right? That's awesome. So that's more information to take seriously. Okay, anyway. Looks like they keep talking about the core. Let's see what they say. The core begins to emit high-frequency, rhythmically alternating streams of electromagnetic energy at a higher rate, which increases over a short period of time. When the core oscillation rhythm reaches 13 Hertz, its electromagnetic behavior becomes unpredictable and leads to a shift of the magnetic and geographical poles. Now, okay, so the pole situation is fascinating, and as we've covered in other videos before, we have our ancestors talking about pole shifts, but not just electromagnetic pole shifts in the past, but actual geographic pole shifts. And I don't mean the pole shift just, like 20 degrees or something. We have literally a point in time to where our ancestors are telling us that the Earth literally flipped over. And it not only did it flip over once, it flipped over at least twice. Right? This is what the historical record shows. Even more interesting, the geological evidence also seems to confirm this as well. So it's very interesting that we have an official document, supposedly, declassified from another, country that's a superpower, and they are also discovering and following the evidence that shows that Earth had some extremely crazy catastrophic events very recently. What makes this even more interesting is they are not talking about they're not talking about Velikovsky. They're not quoting anything like that. They're not sitting over here quoting Birkeland. They're not talking about Tesla. They're talking about general stuff. So my question would be, what evidence did they have access to that would allow them to come to these conclusions if they never utilized any of the other people doing this stuff? I wonder. We'll have to keep reading on this. Yeah, this has gone on long enough. We'll have to keep reading this, but I find it interesting that a third party, a third governmental party, is actually willing to put something like this into print, and then what they put into print is actually lining up with other aspects of research going on all over the world. My question is, did they have access to that research, or did they come to these conclusions with other pieces of evidence that they have access to that you and I don't have and will never see? Like that's a legitimate question, and that really opens up one hell of a can of worms, because that means that these governments are actively looking into these events and they're taking them seriously. Like they're not wasting their time with this. They are going out of their way to try to figure out what happened in the past, and maybe they already know. For all I know, they already know, and they're trying to erase all of this. right? Because if anything in this document is true, which so far everything we've read except for the the Earth's core part, but that's a different subject anyways. Everything we've read so far, it lines up scientifically, right? And the ramifications for any of this being true completely changes everything. It not only changes science, but it changes who you would be as a person as well, because now all of a sudden your human origins are now completely different than what you've probably been taught, right? Depending on where you come from and what your background is. Obviously not everybody. But for the vast majority of people, especially in the Western world, you've either been created by a god or you've evolved from a monkey. That's it. What if it's something else, right? What if some of the stuff in this document, some of the stuff that the Sumerians talk about is real, right? This document certainly seems to like to talk about it and go into it as if it's real, right? That changes everything, right? If humans today are not a god creation or an evolution thing, suddenly your entire existence is put into question in one hell of a way. All right, but that's a different subject too. I know. All right, so we're going to end this crap here because we've gone on long enough. It took me an hour to get through like 4 paragraphs. You like that? We're going to go through this whole document. It's going to take 12,000 years to do this. We're going to do every single paragraph. I'm going to go backwards and we're going to go through everything and we're going to test it. No, I'm just kidding. We're not doing all that crap because I don't have time for that. But we'll keep going. This document's fascinating though, right? You can't just ignore this. I know there's people out there saying, well, it's disinfo, blah, blah, blah. And I don't disagree, maybe, possibly. But, the stuff in here that they are talking about, they are pointing out the real science of things. So it's possible that some of the stuff we're looking at actually has bits of truth that will help us as researchers try to figure out what the hell is going on. All right. Okay. That's enough of this crap.